My name is Taryn Vale. I live on the eastern edge of the village of Mirewood, a border settlement nestled between human farmlands and the highland trails once used by orc tribes. The center of the village is orderly rows of straight thatched roofs, a stone-lined, well-solid stables, and the red glow of the forge. My house lies farther out where the poorest souls meet the wind first and are forgotten soonest. It leans slightly to the left like a tired old man. One window has been patched with oil-soaked cloth since last winter. The wooden door does not fit its frame, and on cold nights the wind slips through the gaps as if someone is standing outside breathing down my neck. That night I sat at my crooked table counting the same few copper coins over and over. No matter how many times I counted, the sum never grew. The land rent to Lord Petrick was due soon. The barley I had worked for last harvest had been docked almost entirely for storage fees. My boots were worn through at the soles. The bag of flour held enough for 2 more days at most. My supper was half a stale loaf of barley bread and a wedge of cheese that had begun to smell so strongly I was not sure it was still safe to eat. Outside, the late autumn sky hung heavy as lead. Black clouds pressed low. Wind whistled through the bare branches. I knew that kind of sky. It always promised a long, cold rain. Then I heard the footsteps, heavy, slow, certain, the kind of sound that makes the ground remember it is being stepped on. I froze. In a border village like Mirewood, every child grows up hearing stories of orcs. Boys are warned that wandering after dark will get them taken by green-skinned raiders. Men in the tavern speak of old wars of orc hordes sweeping across the meadows with axes and blood. I had never fought one, but I had heard their marching once when a patrol passed the village years ago. I had not forgotten that sound. 2 shadows appeared through the crack in the door. Not 1, 2. 2 tall, broad-shouldered figures stood motionless in the weed-choked yard in front of my house. The weak light from my oil lamp reached far enough for me to see dark green skin, thick black hair, and armor of leather and metal scarred by long travel. My heart hammered so loudly I thought they might hear it. Then came the knock, 3 measured raps, polite, almost courteous. I rose slowly, my hand brushing the rusted key that hung on a frayed cord around my neck, the only thing my father had left me. It opened nothing in this house. It had never opened a grain bin or a coin chest because we had never owned such things. Still, whenever fear rose, I gripped it out of habit. The knock came again, still patient. I had 2 choices: open the door, or crawl under the table and pray I might become invisible inside my own home. I did not have much dignity left, but what little remained was enough to make me choose the first. I opened the door. 2 female orcs stood there soaked by mist and weary as warriors who had walked half the world. They were so alike that at first glance I might have thought one was the mirror of the other. The same long, sharp faces, the same golden amber eyes like freshly sharpened blades, the same thick black hair braided tightly back, the same deep green skin the color of old forest leaves under storm clouds. Yet small differences showed. The one on the left stood taller, or perhaps straighter, and more alert. The other had softer eyes, though caution still lay thick across her features. The taller one spoke first. "Human," she said in the common tongue of the borderlands, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "Do you understand my words?" "I do." I answered, though my own voice sounded drier than rotten wood. The second stepped forward half a pace, then stopped, as if she did not wish to frighten me further. "We have walked 6 days," she said, "from town to hamlet, from gate to gate." Every door was closed. She paused. On the face of a warrior, I saw something strange, shame. Then she asked, each word careful and slow, "Tonight, may we sleep under your roof?" I looked at them. Then I looked back at my house, the roof that leaked in 4 places, 1 decent blanket, half a loaf of bread, a floor that creaked, a table with a broken leg, a window of cloth instead of glass, the smell of mildew, mold, and long poverty clinging to everything. A wise man would have refused. A frightened man would have refused. I should have refused. But I looked again at the 2 orc sisters. not as monsters from fireside tales, but as two women who had walked too far, been met with hatred too often, and still knocked politely even though they already knew what the answer usually was. I heard myself say the roof leaks. The door does not seal. Wind blows in from every side. I have only half a loaf of bread and some questionable cheese. The floor is uneven. One window is cloth instead of glass. This whole house smells of mold and bad decisions. The sisters stared at me, waiting for the refusal they had clearly heard many times before. I stepped aside. "If you do not mind, I said come in." They both went still. The shorter one blinked first. "You mean it. I am very afraid I told the truth." "But yes, I mean it." The taller one narrowed her eyes and studied me for a long moment. "You are either the bravest human I have ever met. I think the stupidest is more accurate." At that, the other let out a small, disbelieving laugh. And so, on the night before the rain, the two orc sisters stepped into my crooked house, and I still did not know that this foolish decision would change my life forever. As soon as the two orc sisters stepped through the doorway, my small house felt instantly overcrowded in a way that was almost comical. The taller one, Kessa, had to duck her head to avoid hitting the low beam. Rava turned slowly, taking in the single room, and let out a breath as if searching for a polite way to describe the place I still called home. "Cramped," she said at last. "You're being kinder than most people in the village," I replied. "They usually call it a pile of wood that hasn't collapsed yet." The other one glanced up at the roof. Right then, a leftover drop from the previous rain fell onto her armored shoulder with a soft plink. She looked up then at me. "Is your roof crying? I think it's threatening me." This time, both of them laughed, though quietly. The sound made my house feel less hollow. I gestured toward the cold hearth in the corner. "There's some charcoal. I can start a fire so you can dry your armor if you want. I, only have one chair, and it's praying not to break." Rava removed her leather gloves and nodded. "I am Rava. This is my sister, Kessa. Taryn." Kessa still hadn't fully relaxed. Her golden eyes scanned the room, the old chopping knife in the corner, the half-empty grain sack, the thin curtain that separated my sleeping area. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yeah. No wife, no family, nothing." I don't know why it was so easy to tell them the truth. Maybe when you're this poor and this alone, there isn't much left worth hiding. My parents had both died in the plague 3 years ago. The little plot of land I worked had been mortgaged. I survived by doing odd jobs, mending nets, splitting firewood, repairing fences, enough to stay alive, not enough to hold my head high. I divided the half loaf of barley bread into 3 portions, making mine the smallest without even thinking. I placed the cheese on the table, cut away the moldy parts, and pushed it toward them. "Don't refuse," I said when I saw Rava open her mouth. "It'll be hard as a brick by tomorrow anyway." They sat on the floor because there was nowhere else. 2 battle-hardened orc warriors covered in road dust sat in the poorest house on the edge of the village, sharing stale bread and questionable cheese with a human they had met less than an hour ago. The scene was so strange, I had to fight not to laugh. After the first few bites, I saw how hungry they truly were. They didn't eat greedily, but with deep focus, the kind that comes from people who have learned to ignore hunger until food actually appears. "I thought orc warriors didn't go around asking for shelter," I said, the words slipping out. Kessa lifted her eyes. Not angry, just calm. "Normally we don't. So why?" Rava glanced at her sister. They exchanged a quick look, the kind only sisters born from the same womb can understand completely. "We left our clan," Rava said quietly. "We walked away from the war in the north. From the banners, the chieftain, and the call to arms. Deserters," Kessa said bluntly. "If you use your people's word." I stayed silent. In the borderlands, everyone knew that desertion was unforgivable among orcs. Leaving the tribe during wartime was worse than dying in battle for them. But I also saw the exhaustion in their eyes. Not just physical tiredness, it was deeper, as if they had been forcing themselves to do things that went against their souls for too long. Why, I asked. Because I no longer wanted to kill those who hadn't taken up weapons, Kessa answered. because some villages were called military targets, but when you entered them, you only found cold hearths and children's toys. Rava looked down, turning a piece of bread in her hands. Because there are orders that once followed leave you unable to recognize yourself anymore. Outside, the rain began to fall. The first drops tapped on the roof like testing fingers. Then faster, heavier. Within moments, my roof started leaking in the usual 3 places. I hurried to place the pot's basins and dented bucket to catch the water. Kessa watched the entire process without changing expression, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch slightly. You really plan to live through the winter like this? I was planning to negotiate with the rain. Rava laughed softly again. I pointed to the main area of the floor. You two can sleep out here. I'll take the space behind the curtain. No, Kessa said immediately. We will not take your sleeping place. I'm not offering, I replied. I'm trading. You two are twice my size. Sleeping behind the curtain would be death by suffocation. After a short argument, I won simply because it was my house. Kessa removed her outer armor, revealing old scars along her arms. Rava unstrapped her short sword and placed it within easy reach. The wariness of those who live by battle remained even in exhaustion. When I slipped behind the thin curtain, the rain had grown heavier, mixing with the sound of water dripping into the pots to create the familiar poorhouse melody. But that night, there were new sounds. 2 women trying to settle comfortably in too small a space, tired sighs, and then Rava's very quiet voice in the darkness. He gave us almost all of his food, Kessa replied after a moment. I know why I couldn't see her sister, but I heard the weight in her voice. Perhaps Kessa said, because he also knows what it feels like to be invisible to the whole world. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the thin curtain swaying in the draft. My hand unconsciously tightened around the rusted key on my chest. That night, for the first time in many months, my house no longer felt completely empty. I woke before dawn, the gray light of early morning slipping through the oilcloth window and pooling across the single room. The house still carried the scent of last night's rain-damp wood and strangers. I heard low voices beyond the curtain. We should leave before the village wakes, Rava whispered. If anyone sees us here, he will have trouble. Kessa answered. I pushed the curtain aside and stepped out. Both of them turned at once, looking like children caught doing something forbidden. I'm awake, I said. No need to whisper like thieves. Rava's green cheeks darkened slightly, an odd sight on an orc warrior's face. Kessa rose first. We must go, she said. Thank you for last night. Rava reached into her travel pack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. This is better than your bread. Take it. I started to refuse, but the look in her eyes told me it would be useless. I accepted. In return, I lifted the frayed cord from around my neck and held out the rusted key my father had left me. This is for you, I said, offering it to Kessa. Both sisters stared stunned. I cannot take your family heirloom, Kessa said. My father once told me it opened something important, I replied, looking at the key in my palm and then at them. For years, I never understood what he meant. Last night I finally did. Rava asked softly, What is it? I think I said, it opens the choice to become someone different from what the world decides you must be. Kessa studied me for a long moment. At last, she took the key with both hands carefully as if receiving an oath. She slipped it onto the leather cord beside the carved fang that marked her old clan and let it rest against her chest. I will keep it, she said. And remember. Then they left. I stood in the yard and watched their two tall figures grow smaller until the morning mist swallowed them along the eastern forest road. When I turned back inside, the room returned to its familiar poverty. The roof still leaked in the same places. The floor still slanted. The coins on the table had not multiplied. Yet something inside me felt lighter than it had in years. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On the third morning, Howen Crick arrived with his familiar leather ledger and a voice sweet as velvet over steel. He reminded me of the land rent, the old debts, the new interest, and the possibility of seizing property if payment is not made by week's end. In plain words, if I could not find a sum I had no hope of raising, this leaking house would no longer be mine. After he left, I sat, staring at the pitiful pile of coins on the table for a long time. There was no miracle here, only the same dead-end wall I had been staring at for years. Then I heard the heavy footsteps again. This time they were not two, they were many. I rushed to the door. In the yard stood Kessa and Rava. Behind them were 5 more orcs, older, more scarred faces, hard as carved stone. One male with a jagged scar across his cheek. One female whose black hair was streaked with silver. 2 broad-shouldered brothers carrying hammers. And one who was so quiet he seemed to blend into the gray sky itself. My stomach dropped. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misunderstood everything, that they had returned to punish me for some crime I had not yet realized I committed. Then Kessa looked at me and smiled. A real smile. "Terran Vale," she called loudly. "We have a problem." Rava added, "Several problems." I stood frozen. "Should I be worried?" Perhaps Rava said, but not the old kind. They stepped into the yard. The silver-haired female, lead arms crossed, staring at my house with personal offense. "I am Nexa," she said. "I was a builder before they put an axe in my hands and told me to kill. Your roof is an insult." I blinked. "Sorry," the scarred male whistled through a wooden tooth. "We made it 2 days east," he said. "Then these 2 would not shut up about your house. Leaking roof, crooked door, window of cloth, slanted floor." One of the brothers nodded hard. "We are masons, carpenters, furnace builders, roof menders. We cannot walk past a pile about to fall and pretend we did not see it." Rava looked embarrassed but still smiled. "In short, we came back." Kessa met my eyes straight on. "If you allow it, we want to fix this house." I looked at them. 7, no, 8 deserters turning around in the middle of their journey because of one leaking roof belonging to a broke human they had known for a single night. "Are you all insane?" I asked. "Yes," Nexa answered at once. "But our work is very good." I laughed. The sound burst out so suddenly that even I was surprised. Then I looked at my roof, at the weeds in the yard, at the group of orcs standing there as if the fate of the whole day depended on one nod from me. "There is one condition," I said. They all looked at me. "If we fix it," I pointed at myself, "I work too." "This is still my house." Nexa gave the smile of someone who had just heard exactly the answer she wanted. "Agreed," she said. "And fair warning, once we start, we will fix more than the roof." I stood there in the weak morning light, heart beating strangely fast, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the future in front of me did not look entirely gray. The next week became the strangest stretch of my life. 6 orc deserters plus Kessa and Rava poured into my crooked house like they were launching a military campaign. Nexa climbed the roof. Before the sun was fully up, took one look around and declared, "This is not a roof. This is a prayer made of straw." Volk immediately ripped the crooked door off its hinges, muttering, "A real door should close." I know it sounds radical, but trust me. The 2 broad-shouldered brothers, Dern and Rask, ran strings to level the floorboards. Silent Sail hauled stones for new foundations. Kessa and Rava replaced the window, bargaining a sheet of actual glass from a passing merchant who was too frightened by 2 armed orc women to haggle. And me, I learned. I learned how to mix mortar without making it too thin, how to drive nails without splitting the wood, how to cut thatch at the right angle so the rain would slide off instead of through. I learned that Kessa could look at a beam and know which one was rotten just by the way it sounded when she tapped it. I learned that orcs swore with a creativity that made my face burn. I learned that Nexa could scramble across a roof faster than any village boy I had ever seen. I learned that Dern and Rask had left their clan after being ordered to execute their own younger sister because she loved a human man. I learned that Volk had walked away from the front lines after watching a village burn, not soldiers, just children and elders. I learned that each of them carried a single moment when obeying orders would have cost them the last piece of themselves they still recognized. The village noticed, of course. It was impossible not to notice 7 orcs sawing timber, mixing mortar, and shouting at one another in the far corner of Mirewood. Widow Beatrice Wren, the village's living saint of gossip and judgment, appeared on the second day, clutching her prayer beads, her face twisted as if she had smelled something dead. "Tarren Vale, you have lost your mind," she announced, "bringing orcs into your house, letting them climb your roof." Kessa was measuring a rafter and did not even turn around. "We hear quite well." Beatrice clutched her beads tighter. Howen Crick came to scribbling in his ledger and reminding me that Lord Petrick was very interested in your unusual associations. I told him his lordship's interest might be better spent on the leaking roofs of his tenants. He did not like that answer, but something began to shift. A small boy from the house across the ditch crept over to watch. He stood for hours, eyes wide, as Rava fitted the new door frame. "My house leaks too," he said finally. His mother rushed over apologizing, but Nexa was already asking which house, how many leaks, thatch, or planks. 2 days later, once my roof was finished, they moved on to the boys' house. No payment asked. Then came Widow Helen's cottage, then old Tob's shack, then the lean-to of the hired couple with 3 children, then the broken sheep pen of Farmer Gar. The poorest edge of Mirewood, the part where people like me lived shoulder to shoulder with cold wind and debt, began to look at these orcs not as monsters, but as people who carried hammers and were willing to use them when no one else had time. A repair list appeared on the fresh plank wall of my house, written in charcoal by Rask. 7 houses, then 12, then 17. One night, staring at the lengthening list by lamplight, I said, "You should go. You cannot stay here forever. We can—" Rava answered simply. Kessa rested her chin on the handle of her hammer fingers, brushing the rusted key at her throat. "The question is not whether we can. It is whether you want us to." I did not answer right away, because deep down I already knew that if they left, my house would stand straighter than before, the roof would no longer leak, and the door would close properly. But the thing I feared losing most was no longer the thatch or the hinges. It was the feeling of no longer being alone. I learned other things, 2 quieter things. I learned the exact weight of mortar when it is mixed right, how it clings to the trowel just enough. I learned the rhythm of hammers striking in unison, a sound that filled the empty spaces inside my chest. I learned that Sale, who rarely spoke, had once carried his dying chieftain off a battlefield and been called coward for refusing to leave him behind. I learned that every scar on their bodies had a story, and every story ended the same way. One day the order came and they chose to walk away instead of becoming something they could not live with. At night we sat around the new fire pit Volk had built outside. The flames danced higher than my old hearth ever had. Kessa sometimes turned the rusted key between her fingers, its edges catching the light. Rava would pass me a piece of flatbread she had baked on a hot stone still warm. Nexa would grumble that my hammering looked like a cat scratching, then show me again patient in a way that made my throat tight. The gossip in the village grew louder, then quieter, then changed its tone. People still stared when the orcs walked through the lanes, but the stares were no longer only fear. Some mothers began to leave small baskets of eggs or apples on my doorstep. A few men who had lost sons in the old wars came to watch the work in silence, then offered their own hands. One afternoon, Beatrice herself appeared at the edge of the yard watching Nexa repair a collapsed chimney on her neighbor's house. She did not speak, but the next morning I found her front step newly leveled, and she never mentioned it. The list on the wall grew longer still. I stood in my doorway one evening, the air smelling of fresh-cut wood and wet mortar, and felt the weight of years lift in a way no coin or full belly ever could. My house was no longer the place where the wind won, and for the first time I understood that the rusted key around Kessa's neck had never been meant to open a lock. It had been waiting to open something far harder. A door I had stopped believing still existed. The 12th day arrived with the sound of hooves on the hard-packed road. Lord Petrick of Mirewood rode into the yard on his black stallion cloak of wolf fur, sweeping behind him boots polished to a mirror shine. Howen Crick followed on a smaller mare, clutching his leather ledger like it was holy scripture. Children scattered from the lane like startled sparrows. Adults stopped their work and watched from doorways and fences. On the roof of old Gar's house, the 7 orcs set down their hammers in unison. Petrick did not dismount. Taran Vale, he called, voice smooth as oil over a blade. I have been patient with you. But this has gone far enough. Has the roof stopped leaking? I asked. His face tightened. You owe land rent, old debts, new interest. And now you shelter orcs disturb the peace and fill the heads of my tenants with ideas that they can live without depending on the rightful order of this domain. I only see people fixing houses, I said. Howin flipped open the ledger at once and read the number aloud. It landed in my chest like a stone dropped down a well. 47 gold coins, a sum that belonged to another life. A year of breaking my back from dawn to dusk would not touch even a corner of it. Petrick smiled the smile of a man who had just pronounced sentence. Fail to pay, and the house and land return to me. You will be sent to labor service. Simple. You tripled the interest 3 weeks ago, I said, but my voice had already gone hoarse. The domain runs on rules. No Volk called down from the roof, his wooden tooth flashing. Your domain runs on bleeding people dry. Silence fell hard. Petrick's face went the color of old ash. Being corrected by an orc in front of his poorest tenants was more than he could swallow. You how much Kessa cut him off, stepping forward into the open yard. The full amount wiped clean, no more chains. Howin checked the ledger again, still savoring the moment. 47 gold. I never got the chance to speak. Rava unslung the heavy pouch at her belt, then Nexa, then Volk, then Dern and Rask, then Sale. One by one the bags landed on the new plank table I had helped build, each thud heavy and final. I stood frozen. What are you doing? I managed. War pay we carried when we left the clan, Volk said. We saved it, Dern added. To buy land somewhere east. To build a place for people like us, Rask finished. Nexa set the last pouch down. But every road we took only led to another strange place unless there was honest work worth doing. I stared at the pile of gold on my table. More money than I had seen in my entire life. Enough to make my leaking, hungry house look like something from a dream. No, I said. I cannot take this. You gave 2 of us shelter when you had nothing but half a loaf of stale bread, Nexa answered. You shared your food. You shared your roof. You gave them that rusted key your father left you. She nodded toward the key resting against Kessa's chest. This, she said, tapping the pile of coins, is only the same gift in a different shape. Petrick's eyes fixed on the gold. Greed won over pride. He jerked his chin at Howin, who counted with trembling fingers. Exact. Down to the last coin. From this day, Petrick announced, voice, stiff the house, and land belonged to Taran Vale. Debt cleared. He turned his horse to leave. One more thing, I said. He looked back. They are not guests, I said loud enough for the whole watching lane to hear. I looked at every face in the yard, Kessa with the key at her throat, Rava with flour on her hands from the morning's bread, Nexa with mortar dust in her silver hair, Volk whistling softly through his wooden tooth, Dern and Rask standing shoulder to shoulder, Sale quiet as ever. They are my family. The word left my mouth and struck me harder than any hammer I had swung that week. Family. I thought the word had died with my parents. It had only been waiting for a different shape to come home. Petrick rode away without another word. Howin trailed after him, the ledger suddenly light, because my name was no longer on the debtor page. I stood in the middle of my yard, now my yard, in truth, surrounded by 7 orcs, and the quiet stares of the poorest folk in Mirewood, and for the first time in years, the future did not look like nothing but gray. We built 3 more rooms the following spring. We raised a small workshop beside the house where we could mend doors, build tables, patch roofs, and take on work at prices the poorest could afford. The edge of Mirewood stopped leaking. Children ran out shouting, Sister Iron Key, when they saw Kessa. Rava learned to keep the ledgers with me. Nexa scolded me every time I planed a board like a cat scratching it. Volk still whistled when he spoke, even after we fixed his wooden tooth properly. Dern and Rask took 2 village boys as apprentices. Widow Beatrice still muttered her disapproval. But she also slipped Sale a basket of apples one morning and pretended her front step had fixed itself. Mirewood did not become paradise. People still whispered. Eyes still followed the orcs when they walked to market. Old fear does not die after 1 season of new roofs. But the whispers grew quieter when mothers saw the same green hands that once carried axes now carrying their children's broken toys, or when men who had lost sons in old wars watched those hands raise beams over their own leaking homes. That final winter evening, I stood under a roof that no longer wept, fingers brushing the old rusted key now nailed above the door beside a fresh wooden sign Rava had carved. Blood does not always make family. Choice does. I listened to the low laughter rolling from the new rooms, the steady ring of hammers from the workshop, the sound of life filling every empty corner that had once tried to swallow me. The first night, they had only asked for a place to sleep out of the rain. I thought I had given them shelter for 1 night. The truth was, they had given me a real home for the first time in my life.